Okay, this is a video lecture for CYS 265, and in this lecture we're going to cover some miscellaneous information, do stuff or talk about stuff that should be review for you, and talk about chapter 1 of the textbook. So first thing we'll do is review. So the first thing is, what is cybersecurity? And there are several things this involves: protecting systems, networks, and data against malicious use. There's preventing unauthorized access, that is, people who should not have access to certain systems or data, obtaining somehow access to that. And detecting cyber threats. So if somebody is attacking your system or has compromised your systems or network, how do we detect those? The next thing is, why does this even matter? Well, there's a lot of different reasons. Some of them are financial loss. If somebody compromises your system, this may be direct loss, as if you're Toyota and you can't produce cars. Toyota factory here in Kentucky rolls off one Camry, I think, every 50 seconds. So for every minute you prevent them from creating a car, that's $30,000 to $60,000 loss. And that's just for the Camry line. They have other lines as well. It can also be indirect loss, in that you have to pay people overtime to fix your problem. You may have a ransomware payment that you have to decide whether to make or not. And you might have damage to your company reputation, and that will cause people to maybe not buy products from you in the future. There can be privacy violations. That could be somebody's medical or financial or other confidential information is compromised and obtained and possibly distributed. There could be critical infrastructure attacks, which would be something like shutting down the power grid to a computing facility would cause them to lose money. This would have high effect if it involved hospitals or emergency services. And if it was on a wide enough scale, it could have national security concerns and consequences. And then finally, the last is legal consequences. That is, if a company fails to protect customer data and or does not report a breach like they should, there may be penalties and fines imposed upon them. And then there might be fines under laws such as GDPR, which is in Europe, HIPAA, which is medical data, FERPA, which is educational data, and there may also be state data breach laws that you have to be involved in. Also, you might face lawsuits from your customers as a result of a breach if it was determined you did not do everything you could or should have to protect their data. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is something called the CIA triad. So the initial CIA are not what you normally think of. It's confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility. So the first one, confidentiality, is ensuring that data is only available to users who are authorized to access that data and or use the systems. This might include things like usernames and passwords, multi-factor authentication information, controlling access, which is by RBAC, RBAC, which stands for role-based authentication control or access control. The next The I is for integrity. That is ensuring that the data is accurate, complete, and has not been altered in a malicious way. And some of the things we'll talk about related to that are hashing algorithms, digital signatures, and checksums are all ways to try to ensure integrity of data. And then the A stands for availability. This assures the system and data are accessible when they are needed, and this might be accomplished by redundant systems, backups, load balancers, failover in high availability systems, protection against denial of service attacks, and or distributed denial of service attacks, usually called DOS or DDoS. We'll talk about a number of different types and specific cyber threats, but here are some of the more common, I guess I'll call them categories. The first is malware, and this is just an abbreviation or a shortening of malicious software. So it takes the beginning and end of that and comes up with malware. This is a wide class of software that intends to destroy data, cause harm, alter data, etc. Another attack that's getting more and more popular is referred to as ransomware. It is a type of malicious software that locks you out of your computer files and or systems, and then whoever is responsible for that then demands a ransom payment. And often that ransom is to be paid using cryptocurrency, because crypto is untraceable. The transactions are untraceable. There's something called phishing, spelled with PH. This is a fraudulent practice of sending emails and or other messages supposedly from a reputable company, for example, and they're trying to induce individuals to reveal personal information, passwords, credit card information, social security number, and stuff that they can take and either sell or misuse. Another thing when we talk about cyber threats is insider threats. And this is basically somebody in your company either placed there or maybe they work there trying to cause damage to the company or steal something. They may be posing as individuals with authorized access, like pretending to be a contractor or a partner, and they intentionally or unintentionally misuse that access to harm systems, steal data, disrupt operations, and or leak or sell confidential information. And then one I mentioned a minute ago is denial of service attacks. This is an attempt to disrupt the normal traffic or normal operations of a server, a company, a network, typically by overwhelming it with a flood of extra network traffic that then renders the system and or data inaccessible to legitimate users. The primary goal is just that, to compromise the availability of the target system resources, causing service outages and, again, hindering normal operations. Going back and looking at each of these, the first was malware. There are different categories of malware. The one that's been around probably the longest is a virus. That's a piece of malicious software that infects files and or computers and tries to propagate it. One of the first examples of a virus was all the way back in 1971. It was called the Creeper virus. It was a self-replicating program for testing networks, and it displays the "I am the Creeper, catch me if you can." One of the more popular ones was in the year 2000. It was called the "I love you" virus, and it was really a worm that infected millions by tricking users into opening an attachment. It caused billions of dollars in damage. And then another popular one, again, this may be before some of you all were born, was also in 2000, something called Code Red. And it received a lot of publicity because it affected government sites and caused massive economic loss. So those are some of the viruses. There are lots and lots of them, but that's some I chose to highlight. A virus typically, if not always, is caused by user action. That is, the user visits a website, they open a program, they click on an attachment in email, they click on a link in email. That's how viruses propagate. Now, the next thing is a worm, which is very similar to a virus, although it is self-replicating. It can replicate itself and spread to other computers without any user interaction. Back in 1988, there was something called the Morse worm. That was the first major internet worm. It accidentally caused widespread slowdowns and shutdowns by exploiting vulnerabilities in Unix systems. And then in 2003, another one that got a lot of media was Slammer. And Slammer exploited SQL Server bugs or vulnerabilities, and it caused internet slowdowns. The next is a Trojan, named after the Trojan horse of Troy. It's something that appears to be one thing, but in reality is something else. It disguises itself as a normal or interesting program, and then when you run it, it might do what it claims to do, like play a game of Tetris, but at the same time, it may be searching your hard drive for credit card numbers and or other personal data. There was one called Zeus in 2007, one called WannaCry in 2017. Those are some of the more widely known ones. Ransomware, we already talked about. It collects and often encrypts and bundles up personal data and then says if you pay a ransom, they'll give you the key to get all of your data and files back. 2013, there was CryptoLocker. In 2021, there was one called DarkSide. That's the one that basically shut down the Colonial Pipeline. And in 2024, there was one called Ransom Hub. The last one on the screen is spyware. This is a program that tries to spy on what the user is doing, what website they go to. These may include keyloggers that record every keystroke that you make on your computer. There's several like Pegasus, SpyHigh, and PhoneSpy that try to get personal data, confidential data, and that type of thing off your devices. Another thing that's common is something referred to as social engineering. This is by taking things that seem legitimate and trying to compromise it. For example, calling somebody at a company and saying you're that company's IT and asking them for information so that you can investigate a problem or fix a problem on their PC. Those are things that might happen in social engineering. The first is phishing, and that's where you send email, text messages, call them on the phone, and you try to, as I was just explaining, trick the recipient into falling for the attacker's desired action, such as revealing financial information or login credentials or other sensitive information. Over time, I think this is kind of annoying, but they've come up with other terms based on this. For example, smishing. Smishing is phishing via SMS text messages. Vishing is phishing, with the V standing for voice. So this is phishing over the phone. And then there's a category called fake websites, where often they have names that are close to an intended site. Like you might go to accidentally cmm.com thinking that you were going to cnn.com, and they may have malicious sites or spoofed websites at these typos. And again, those are referred to as fake websites. Next, your book mentions two of these, but this is really the 3 A's of security. So there's 3 concepts related to security that all start with A. The first is authentication. That's basically who you are. How do you prove yourself with passwords, 2-factor authentication, or that type of thing. The second A is authorization. Once you prove who you are, what can you do? And then the third one that the book talks about but doesn't really group it in the 3 A's of security is accounting. And accounting is tracking the actions of users on your system. What commands did they issue? What did they access, etc. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about network security basics and different things that we'll be talking about over the course of the semester. The first is firewalls. Firewalls are intended to inspect traffic and then decide whether or not to pass that traffic, preventing unauthorized access into or out of a computer network. Next, we have IDS and IPS systems. These stand for Intrusion Detection System and Intrusion Protection System. The difference between these two is in a detection system, it detects malicious behavior and then reports it or logs it. A protection system actually takes action to attempt to stop whatever is going on. For secure communications, we have VPNs. And what a VPN stands for is a virtual private network. It creates a secure encrypted tunnel for your internet traffic to flow over. That tunnel exists between your laptop and a destination server or VPN concentrator. And it hides your online activity, your IP address, from your service provider, hackers, and advertisers by routing your connection through, like I said, a remote server. And then another thing we'll talk about quite a bit is secure protocols. These are things like for remote login. Instead of using Telnet, which is not secure, we'll use SSH, which stands for Secure Shell. Instead of using HTTP to look at websites, we'll use HTTPS. And instead of using FTP for file transfer, we'll use SFTP. For sending email, instead of using SMTP, we will use SMTPS. So we will add that S, which a lot of people think stands for secure, but it actually stands for SSL, Secure Socket Layer, which is a way to encrypt traffic and make it secure. Another thing we need to deal with is endpoint security. These are user devices like your computer. To protect your computer or a server, we can use an antivirus. We can make sure that we keep our operating system patched and up to date. We can use a concept of least privilege, which is give the person or program the very lowest or least amount of access that they need to accomplish their task. You know, don't give an accounting person access to the accounting system, the engineering system, the billing system. All they really need is the accounting system. So just give them the bare minimum they need to do their job. The other is using encryption. A lot of times they'll say or use the phrase encryption at rest, encryption in motion, or in transfer. That basically means encrypt your files on the computer, encrypt them while they're traveling over the network, encrypt them everywhere you can. So that was kind of a review that you should have gotten in the prerequisites for this course. And a couple of new miscellaneous information that I thought was important that the book doesn't seem to cover. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to move out of this review into Chapter 1 of the textbook, which is Intro to Network Forensics. So we're going to talk about digital forensics, and to talk about that, we're just going to talk about forensics. That is a set of methods and or expertise used to investigate crimes, to examine evidence that might be presented in a court of law. That's what forensics is. Now, digital forensics is doing that, but is related to electronic devices such as computers, phones, and network. So we're going to examine and or collect evidence. One of the things your book talks about is appropriate handling of evidence. So first, evidence is anything that can be used to prove something. Again, the term originally comes from, court of law. Evidence preservation is the act of conserving and maintaining both the safety and integrity of the data so that you can be assured that somebody didn't tamper with or alter that data. Some of the key aspects of evidence protection is integrity and authentication. Again, that's ensuring the data hasn't been changed. As I mentioned previously, hashing algorithms are one of the ways to do that. Another thing that's very important is referred to as the chain of custody. That is meticulously documenting who handled the evidence, when, and what they were doing with it, from the collection to the preservation. So, who all has seen and or touched and or could have possibly altered the data. Forensic soundness refers to using specialized tools and techniques, for example, imaging a hard drive bit by bit so that you end up with an exact copy. Often you'll want to do that without the system powered on and booted up, because that can change some of the files on the operating system. Or if you had a virus, it might allow the virus to run when you really just want to capture the data without it being altered from the original source. More aspects are documentation, detailed logging of all actions, including identification, collection, analysis, and storage. And then you need to worry about secure storage, which is protecting collected data in a secure, isolated environment to prevent tampering and unauthorized access. At UK, the people that deal with this, they'll do a bit-by-bit copy of a hard drive, and then they will lock that hard drive in a safe until legal tells them that they need to show them the hard drive or give it to somebody else to access. So making sure that somebody can't, sneak in after hours, for example, and steal or alter the data. Another thing Chapter 1 talks about is incident response. When you have an incident, which is a breach or a compromise or data theft, how do you respond to that? There are different things you can do. The first is preparation. That's preparing for an attack and what you would do if you did have an attack. There's the identification of an incident, which is detecting, investigating, and confirming that a security event like a breach or attack has actually occurred. That would be done by analyzing logs, alerts, and network data. And then if you do have an attack, how do you contain that attack? That is, take immediate action to limit the spread and impact of the attack. And different things that you might do in the containment phase are you might isolate systems off the network. You may block all or some of the network traffic to the affected device. You may segment your network off so that there are some machines that can still communicate with each other, but for example, it wouldn't communicate to other parts of your company or the internet. And then you have eradication, which is removing the threat's root cause, all malware that may have been left on the system, any backdoors that were installed, and if the attacker still has a presence, for example, they have accounts they can log into, you want to make sure you eliminate those. Then you have recovery, which is restoring the system's data and operations to the normal state. And then you'll have what the book refers to as lessons learned, often called an after-action review, an AAR, where you go through, analyze what happened, do the timeline, what was the root cause, were there any gaps in security, and how can you improve things so that it does not happen again. So that is incident response. Now, this book talks about network and also talks about cloud, which is part of the course competencies for the class. So I want to mention cloud security. Most vendors and cloud concepts in general have something they call the model of shared responsibility, and that is the end user shares responsibility with the cloud provider. And this table kind of demonstrates that. So, we have something about responsibility is always on the customer, which is all these gold or brown circles. And then we have another model where the responsibility varies a little based on what you're doing. And then you have situations where the cloud provider assumes all the responsibility. So there's different ways to look at this. I'm going to start down the rightmost column. On-prem, that is when you own your computers, they're in your data center, you own the network. Everything as far as responsibility of maintaining those systems falls on the customer. Now at the top, the different things are going right to left: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, software as a service. So in those cases, when you're using those, the data and identities are always owned by and the responsibility of the customer. Now then, when we move down to some other things, for example, operating systems. If you're doing infrastructure as a service, the customer is responsible. But if you're doing platform or software as a service, the vendor, an example, I got this from Microsoft related to Azure. Microsoft is responsible for that. For the network controls, infrastructure as a service, the customer is responsible. Software as a service, Microsoft. But if we're talking about platform as a service, that is a shared responsibility. Then when we go down to the bottom and we talk about the physical host, the hardware, the network, the data centers that these are in the case of cloud computing, that all becomes the responsibility of Microsoft. So you might look over this diagram and make sure you understand the shared responsibility model and some of the examples that are on this slide. Related to cloud security, I mentioned identity. There is something referred to as IAM, which is Identity and Access Management. This is the authentication, who are you, and access, which is what can a particular user access or do if they're logged into their account. Also, logging is very important. AWS has something called CloudWatch for logging. Azure uses Azure Monitor, and GCP, which is Google Cloud Platform, uses cloud logging. Data encryption. Almost all these providers offer encryption of data, both at rest and in motion. So you should make use of that. Backups and disaster recovery in case something fails is a way to keep your cloud environment secure. Another is multi-factor authentication. Sometimes multi-factor authentication can be a pain, but it does serve a good purpose. For example, a lot of times when I log in at UK, I give my user ID and password, and depending on how long it's been since I last did the multi-factor authentication, it may pop up an alert on your phone that says, hey, somebody's trying to log into your account from this location. Is it you or not? And if you click yes, then it logs you in. If you click no, it just ignores that request. And then another is private dedicated connections. Like at UK, we have Azure Express routes. We have multiple express routes to different POPs, which are point of presence, and or different cloud providers. We have redundant paths. So if our Verizon connection goes down, we may switch over to internet too, so that it does not affect our end users. These are some miscellaneous things that I wanted to mention that I didn't see mentioned in chapter 1 and possibly the entire book. The first one is mentioned in the book, but not in great detail, and that's cybersecurity careers. You're getting a degree in cybersecurity. So the assumption is when you leave college that you would like to get a job in cybersecurity. And your book only points out one. But I went and gathered a list of some more. There's Security Operations Series Analyst. Your security operations is often the first line of defense. They're often the person that is trying to determine that a breach has occurred and possibly take the first steps in stopping that. I think the one your book talks about is forensics analyst. They're the people who analyze and investigate digital evidence and investigate breaches or incidents. There's also cloud security analyst, which monitors accesses vulnerabilities, deals with security controls. They interact with a number of IT teams to ensure data and infrastructure in the cloud is secure. Another is referred to as a pen tester, which stands for penetration testing. This is a person who simulates attacks and scans networks, checks operating systems for vulnerability, etc., to try to find problems and fix them before they are exploited. It says they act as ethical hackers. There's actually a certification called ethical hacker because you are kind of attacking the system, scanning the system, but the end result is what you do afterwards. If you were a true hacker or a black hat hacker, you would then try to sell or misuse that data. In the case of an ethical hacker, they would report it, try to work with people to fix it, etc. As far as course expectations, I will assign reading most weeks, if not every week. They may be from the textbook, or it may be investigating things on web, either information I want you to read or maybe related to problems on your homework assignment. I make lecture videos on a variety of topics. Sometimes there's chapter lectures, but other times there's additional lectures, especially in chapter 2. I don't make these videos because I have lots of time to waste. It's obvious to me when people read the lectures and don't. There are things I will say in a lecture. I haven't said it yet to you all, but if I say I really harp on something, for example, internet with a lowercase I is 2 or more machines communicating with each other using the TCP/IP protocol, and internet with a capital I is the worldwide network of networks based on TCP/IP, the internet, capital I. And I'll get people, I'll ask that as 2 questions on a homework assignment right next to each other, and people write, oh, you accidentally put the same question in here twice. Or for the second one, they're like, well, you've already asked us what internet means, so surely you meant intranet, so I'm going to answer for intranet. But, all the time I have people saying they're too busy to really watch the lectures, and that is the type of class. The mode of this class is lectures, and this is a substitute for me standing in the classroom lecturing to you in person. So I can't stress how important it is that you watch the video lectures. Another expectation is that you will complete your assignments and quizzes, and you will complete them on time. Ethics, don't use AI thinking it can do your homework for you. Don't cheat. Don't go to websites where you may find information. Since this is the first time I'm teaching this class, there will not be any out there. But in the classes where I do teach that, searching the web for, homework solutions and that type of thing is totally unacceptable and will result in an E in the class if you're caught doing that. And in most of the classes I teach, my networking classes, my internet protocols, and now this cybersecurity class, it involves a lot of critical thinking. That is, taking concepts that you read about, I talk to you about, that you read in your textbook, and putting them together to solve a more complex or more involved problem. Some of the tools that we're going to be using in the class, I see on the upcoming slide there's a mistake, minor mistake. I apologize for that. That is, the Nmap shouldn't be there. I'll talk about it in a moment. The first tool I wanted to mention was Wireshark. We will be using Wireshark a lot in this class to monitor network traffic, try to determine if bad things are happening. There's a command line version of a packet capture tool called TCP dump. That's what it's called on Unix. On Windows, if you're a Windows user, you will use something called WinDump, which you will have to install as part of a homework assignment early on. Next is Nmap, which is a program for scanning networks to see what services and ports might be open. We'll use that pretty early on. We will probably use some cloud platforms. I kind of envision us using AWS Educate for you to get some cloud experience. I don't know if we'll do any Azure or Google stuff, but we will definitely be doing some AWS stuff over the course of the semester. There's a tool called Whois that we will use when you're trying to track down where an attack came from or possibly who is being attacked. Virtual machines. These virtual machines would probably reside in AWS, but I wanted to specifically mention that. And then, I don't know if we'll use it or not, but if you've had any of the Cisco classes, you should have had to use Packet Tracer to do a lot of your assignments. There is a possibility that I will have you do some stuff in Packet Tracer. I'm not really sure at this point, but I just wanted to put it on here as a possible tool. We will also probably use something called Snort, which tries to detect network hacking and problems or bad stuff going on the network. And then there may be other tools that I deem appropriate as we go through the material in the book. So I just wanted to mention those so you kind of knew what kind of things you might be working with in the course. So that completes my discussion of material related to Chapter 1 of your textbook.